Welcome into the Dawg Dispatch. I am John Smith, your host. I am here back again. My buddy Coach Hayes. We took a little bit of a break so that we could do all of our media assignments, all of our big, big capital J journalists. No, we didn't. We took off because I went on vacation. But I am back and I'm excited to chat with y'all. Thank you for joining the show. If you're watching this live on YouTube, subscribe, hit the like button, join us in the chat. If you're listening to it on podcast, we really appreciate it. And we are excited to get things rolling again. Coach, how in the world are you doing this week?
Oh, this is unreal. I've enjoyed the summer months and all the different things that's going on with Georgia, and got a lot of things to talk about tonight to be very excited about. I hope you had a good vacation. You're refreshed and renewed. I get a feel. Gotten this week started back with my graduate school classes on my doctorate, and I certainly down at Walton High School there in Roswell, and I certainly would not. I don't think you could pay me any amount of money to live down there all the time. I don't see how you do it, my friend.
I told you. I mean, I've worked from home the last 3 years. That's how I do it. So I just avoid the traffic altogether.
You just avoid it altogether then.
Exactly. No, but I'm glad that to be back. I'm glad you're down in our neck of the woods this week. Coach, tonight we're going to talk about all kinds of things. Georgia recruiting is absolutely on fire. Fuego. People think the weather in Atlanta is hot right now. Ain't nothing compared to what Kirby Smart has got going on in Athens. We're going to talk a little bit about the blue chip ratio, a little bit about EA Sports, toughest place to play. Who knows where this thing is going to go? But Coach, I do want to start with recruiting updates. So we're 66 days till Georgia football. You know, the thing happened again that always happens with Georgia and recruiting is a lot of these teams, a lot of these fan bases, a lot of these coaches, they go out and they get these guys to commit early. And Georgia is still hosting visits. Georgia, Kirby Smart is still recruiting. And these fan bases go out and they start celebrating where they are in the recruiting rankings. And they start talking about stuffing Kirby Smart in the locker. And they start talking about doing all of these things. And Coach, it always ends up happening. The end of June, early July, all of a sudden Kirby starts pulling the trigger on these guys. And these people are nowhere to be found. The people who were talking about, all the stuff, beating their chests about coming into the state of Georgia and taking your players and all these things. Man, so in just the last week, we've had Justus Terry and Isaiah Gibson decommit from USC, both elite 5-star defenders. Isaiah Gibson has committed to Georgia now. 5-star edge out of Warner Robins. Georgia has picked up Dantrell Glover, who's a 4-star offensive lineman. Georgia's picked up Tyler Williams. We'll talk about those guys in a second. But what's your pulse? What's your feeling about where Georgia is recruiting-wise right now? Georgia's sitting at number 3 in the 2025 class rankings across multiple different groups who rank such teams.
Oh, we're on fire, John. Honestly, it's a perfect spot for us to be in. And, from my standpoint, I've told you since almost, I think, February when we first started mentioning recruiting, is that I'm not going to get on this roller coaster because there's too many intangibles now to talk about. There's a couple of things, obviously the CJ Wiley news yesterday, I think was a little bit of a bump in the road, but I really do feel, just based off what you said, and our consensus was between that, is we saw something happen like this last year. Hell, I remember sitting there actually breaking down a short video on KJ Bolden, wishing him the best, thinking, he's made a decision to go where he's gone. And, we know what happened in the end recruiting situation with that. It is a long way to December, but I'm telling you right now, just as I've said in the previous couple of pods we've done, we are on fire. I would say that we're going to continue to steamroll through June and July. We're going to see great things happen, and we're going to feel very good about where we're at in our recruiting class as we begin as summer workouts come to a close and we get ready for that first football game.
Yeah, I mean, Kirby Smart has said it. He said it publicly. He said it loudly. He said it over and over. If you don't recruit, you will never outcoach recruiting. And there is no one, for my money, as a head coach especially, is a better recruiter than Kirby Smart. And his staff is a group of elite recruiters because that's what he knows to be true, and that's what has proven to be true, which we'll talk about when we talk about the blue chip ratio in a few minutes. But has proven to be true is that if you can't recruit, you're not going to win in college football, period. You're not. And now you have multiple opportunities. You have the transfer portal if you need to plug gaps. You've got all the way to December, and you've got the opportunity to get guys all throughout the year. And so if you're banking on commitments, and I'll say this to Georgia fans too, right? I mean, we know, I guarantee you there are some people right now that are committed to Georgia that are not going to make it to December.
Right.
There are kids right now that you're excited about that are not going to sign with Georgia in December that are committed right now. But what I will say is there are kids right now that you thought, like you said, Coach, we've seen it before. Like you thought, man, we missed out on this guy. One of them was yesterday, CJ Wiley, who shocked everyone, picked Florida State. Everyone thought, literally his parents, from what I've heard, thought that he was either picking Georgia or LSU.
Right.
Florida State was not on the table for him, according to folks close to him. And the kid picks Florida State. I mean, what's up with that?
It's crazy. I was really blown away by that. You really saw it in the video how awkward that presentation was. Honestly, it's one of the more awkward ones I've seen, where you got the mom and dad on both sides. I mean, they were going whiskey, tango, foxtrot. Are you kidding me? You can almost see and sense just the air kind of decompress out of the room. But again, that's another one of those situations. Even what he said after, I know we're going to talk about it a little bit in depth, but even what he said afterwards makes you feel and realize that the recruitment's still open. And I agree with you. There are going to be kids that we fill out, that are in the stable right now that won't be with us by the time we get to December. There's going to be a lot of moving parts to it, but I definitely see us in the top 3 in a recruiting class when we get to December. There's no doubt about it. Could be the number 1 class again.
Yeah. And Chris in the chat said it best. Wiley didn't even believe himself when he picked Florida State. No. I mean, he said, Wiley said, after, if you didn't catch the comment, so CJ Wiley, first let's back up a little bit, tell everybody. CJ Wiley, elite wide receiver from Milton High School here in the state of Georgia. His dad, deep ties to LSU, but he is a kid. He would be an LSU legacy kid, but he is a kid who Georgia has been all in on. They really want CJ Wiley on this roster. He's an elite wide receiver, that Georgia really candidly needs an elite wide receiver in this class. And CJ Wiley was trending toward Georgia. I mean, he's trending heavily toward Georgia. Last minute, yesterday he has his commitment. Last minute, he puts the Florida State hat in the middle, in between LSU and Georgia, puts the Florida State hat on. Then after, if you hadn't heard it, after he says, I'm committed to FSU for now. I'm still going to take my visits. Basically says my recruitment is still open, but I'm sticking with Florida State for now. Right. This is recruiting in 2024. Now, for those who think this is new, it is new with NIL and all these. There's a lot of newness and a lot of new wrinkles and a lot of new things that coaches and programs have to navigate. But Reuben Foster, I think it was who had he had an Auburn tattoo and flipped to Alabama. So this has been, these things have been happening. So there is not many things that can keep a kid truly committed unless they're just a special kid. But CJ Wiley, Coach, I think CJ Wiley, he gave me, and I tweeted this, he gave me big KJ Bolden vibes. Big KJ. I
agree with you 100%.
Yeah. We saw this with KJ Bolden last year, where he picked Florida State in August, and then the week of signing day, he flipped to Georgia. And CJ Wiley was very similar. A guy who is going with what he thinks is best for him right now. Probably getting promised the moon and a lot of things, and ultimately I think when reality sets in, when he sees development, when he sees program trajectory, when he sees opportunity to play in some of these games, like going to Texas versus Alabama, all these teams, I think he's certainly going to going to make a different decision.
I think too, the ones that they're mentioning in the chat, the one that I might see is that linebacker from Buford, the Pilati kid, could be one that we don't see on the roster by the time it gets to December. I'm not sure about the Stephon Shivers kid either, the D lineman. I'm excited about kids that are there. Like I said, what I'm going to try to do is continue just to look and pursue their potential, their abilities, and what they can give the University of Georgia if they stay on roster once they sign their national letter of intent. But until then, it's kind of unique to see the different progressions that we'll see. It's almost like watching a horse race where you see one out in the lead, then all of a sudden they take turn one, and then it changes. It's the same principle. I think we're going to see the biggest thing that I see for us this year that's going to be consistent and hopefully stay committed is our defensive front, the defensive in edge pressures, our defensive tackles, those kinds of things. If we can lock those guys in that we think are going to come to Georgia, that's really what's going to solidify our recruiting class along with those skill guys. Not talking about a lot of running backs, but there are some solid running backs there. Believe it or not, necessarily not talking about the DBs as much because of what we hauled last year. But it still looks like we could possibly have the number one and number two defensive line in the nation, the number one linebacker in the nation, and the number two edge in the nation. So, I mean, there's a lot of good potential that's coming from that defensive front, which it's kind of staggered the way it should be because of what we've gained and what we are going to be losing this year. So, like I said, it's really easy to right now speculate on who's going to be here, who's not going to be here, but it's really nice to see that we're beginning to see some of those guys get on board, get on the train, get in that parade. Don't sit there on the sidewalk and watch us go by and wave at you. They're getting in the parade, so that's good to see.
Yeah, agree. All right, let's talk about a couple of these guys before we move on. So Isaiah Gibson is a big one. We haven't had a chance to do a show since he's committed. Love this kid. We talked about him, right, when we were talking about the potential for him to flip to Georgia. Tell me a little bit about what folks should be excited about for Isaiah Gibson.
Isaiah Gibson is going to give us that, not only that elusiveness of being very fast and crafty from the edge position. I see him being that true jack, similar to what Trayvon Walker was for us. I know a lot of people are really not sure about what the edge pressure guy is for us defensively. And honestly, to tell you the truth, he fits the profile of what Mikael Williams is going to be doing for us this year, that we're beginning to see him transition into from what the previous couple of years of frustration of playing that inside 4i4. Now he's going to get to play that outside edge type player a lot more, to where he truly fits the role of what a forward down lineman, a true four-man front would be, like a 9 technique off the tight end or off your H-back wing, whatever it may be, where he has the ability to not only pound on those guys and stop the run, but he's also able to be quick and elusive and get off that edge pressure and get to the quarterback. So he provides a dynamic that we haven't seen. I don't want to comp him really to Trayvon, but he kind of has sort of that body frame that kind of gives me those vibes of where I see the elusiveness of him being very crafty to get to the quarterback for those havoc plays, but also too to be able to pound on those tackles, to pound on those tight ends, to take on double teams, and to be able to still get to the football and be a run stopper.
Yeah, and I love that about Isaiah Gibson. As Henry said in the chat as well, you can tell that he wants to be a dog. I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing about this kid, and I think some of these kids that Kirby is going after. I mean, Taylor Taylor is another one who committed, and his mom. If you watch Taylor Taylor's mom on Twitter, especially, but just the way like they are immediately all in on Georgia, all in repping, like all in, you can tell that there are certain people that Kirby Smart is going after that they just want to play at Georgia. Now, doesn't mean they weren't committed somewhere else. Doesn't mean they didn't consider somewhere else. Doesn't mean, but ultimately, the thing about Kirby Smart that I love is he is going to prioritize culture. He's going to prioritize culture fit. He's going to prioritize all these things. Obviously, he's going to recruit at a high level, but he's going to find kids that want to play at Georgia, that want to buy into what he is building and what he has built at Georgia. And you can tell, a lot of these kids when they commit, just the difference between how they were talking. Like I'll use Isaiah Gibson as an example, where how he was talking when he was committed to USC versus how he's carrying himself now that he's committed to Georgia. It's just a different vibe. And I think a lot of that comes from, you have a head coach who played at Georgia. You have a head coach who wore that jersey, who wore that helmet. You have a guy who represents the brand at the highest level because he has lived and breathed the brand for most of his life. You know, and
exactly.
So I think that's just so huge, so huge.
It's important too that, you know, to me, why don't you want to come home and play? You know, when they're at USC, it just made no sense to me. You're 2,000 miles away from home. You want to come home. You want to have your family involved. You want to have all the people who have invested in your life to be able to see you play and play on one of the biggest stages there are under a prolific program that is doing so well right now. And I mean, it just seems to be the perfect fit for him, and I'm enjoying the fact that he has done the right thing. He seems to be locked in, and we're going to see a good one out of him before it's all said and done.
I think so too. So a couple others that I want to touch on too. Dantrell Glover, commit out of Langston Hughes and Fairburn, 4-star interior offensive lineman, guard center type guy. Coach, have you had a chance to look at Dantrell? Do you have any thoughts on Dantrell?
I sure have. I've had a chance. The only one that if there's one thing that I got a chance to do while you were gone is I broke down a lot of these potential recruits, and it's funny, I broke down Dantrell the day before he committed. By the way, Eric, I'm going to be getting on Tyler Williams here pretty soon as well. He's new on my radar, but I've been watching film on him all day since I got home from school today. But anyhow, long story short, Dantrell is going to be another one of those just road pavers. He's going to be an interior offensive line. I wouldn't doubt if they probably look at him as a center, and definitely at the guard spots. He plays tackle at his high school there in I believe it's Langston Hughes is the high school where he goes to. What I notice on film with him is his flexibility in his waist is something they're going to have to work on. He plays a little high, but just like with any other kid you see at the guard tackle position, offensive lineman that's a man among boys, he's a mauler. He gets his hands on you. He's not letting you go. He'll block you to the whistle. You like his want to, which is very important for me, because to me, when they get to the University of Georgia, that next step is taken up where they're going to improve him on his flexibility in his hips. They're going to gain that muscle. He's going to lose some more of that baby fat, and he is going to be moving. The only thing that I don't see on film from him is he doesn't have anything on film of him pulling. So like gap scheme stuff where he's pulling to kick out or pulling to wrap, which is what he would do at the tackle position in college. He would be pulling to kick out, but you don't have any pulling. So no skip pulling, sort of like what we watched the other day with Ernest Green III. You don't see any of that on film. So I actually advised him as I was talking in the film when I was breaking it down is that we need to see you pulling, brother. Hopefully they do pull. I would think they run some gap scheme. But as far as just his overall base blocking, his ability to gallop step out and take people on and engage, I mean, you like what you see. Stacy Searles obviously sees a lot of potential in him, and I trust in what they're doing. He's never let me down so far, realistically, with any of these kids that he's brought in.
Yeah. Henry says, who is stronger, Micah Morris or Dantrell Glover? For those who don't know, Dantrell Glover, he's benched. I don't know the actual number. I've read somewhere between 450 and 475 pounds is his bench press in high school.
So strong.
I played high school football. Here's a little story for you. I played high school football with a kid who I watched him max rep 500 pounds. Which is the most insane thing I've ever seen in my entire life, is seeing somebody bench press 500 pounds, especially a legitimately 17-year-old senior in high school. And as someone who did not bench anywhere near 500 pounds, anybody that gets in that stratosphere is just insane, especially if you're doing it as a 16, 17-year-old kid. It's just wild. 4 45-pound
plates on each side. That's pretty stout, roughly, if you're looking at
it's pretty stout. It's
roughly,
pretty stout.
I think, right there.
Yep. Yep. Nathan Hoff, the guy who bench pressed 500 pounds that I played with, when he benched, so everybody was spotting. We were in the field house in Rome, Georgia, Armory High School. Door was open. The door leads out to the track. He bench presses it. He gets, the full rep in, right? Then racks the weights back. And the dude literally, had so much adrenaline, he popped up off of the bench and ran out the door and ran almost a full lap around the track. Wow. Offensive lineman just like taking off. And that's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life.
You gotta tell Henry though. I have a crush on Micah Morris, so I'm gonna have to be a little partial to Micah to begin with, and say I know Glover's strong, but Micah Morris I think can definitely bench press a house.
Let me tell let me tell y'all something. If you ever ask Coach this person or Micah Morris, it doesn't matter the question. It's going to be Micah Morris, period. It doesn't matter the question. Doesn't even
He
matter.
makes my heart beat fast.
You could be like, who's taller, Tate Ratledge or Micah Morris? Tate Ratledge is obviously taller. No, Coach Micah Morris. Micah Morris got to be taller.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Coach A is always going to go with Micah Morris. All right, Coach, and I'm sorry to our audience right now if you're hearing me sniffle or cough. I've got a little bit under the weather. This is my flu game. We'll just call it.
Oh my goodness,
my flu game here.
Getting after it.
Yeah, Coach's favorite is definitely Xavier Truss. The folks in the chat.
Eric, don't trigger me this early, kid. We're gonna be in trouble. Oh.
Coach loves Xavier Truss. That's his guy right there. So,
I'm gonna have to bite the bullet because I eventually got to break him down to see what we're going to be seeing from him next year.
All right, last recruiting update. Georgia did get a commit from Tyler Williams, who's a 4-star wide receiver, 6'1", about 195 pounds, out of Armwood High School in Seffner, Florida. That's in the Tampa area. Really, really good, really good football player. Someone mentioned in the chat earlier that that Tyler Williams scores a touchdown about every time he catches the ball, which is true. He had 26 receptions last season and had 14 touchdowns on 26 receptions. He averages about 22 yards a catch. And, just a really elite wide receiver for the classification that he plays in. One of the things I love, right, is that, and Georgia fans, you should really, really pay attention to this. So I just mentioned, we talked about CJ Wiley. I think CJ Wiley is very likely to still end up at Georgia. He may end up at LSU. I don't think he's going to end up. I don't think he's going to end up at Florida State. But that being said, Georgia fans, you should be very excited when Georgia has a position target. Okay, so let's say like CJ Wiley, wide receiver, and that kid chooses another school. And then the next morning or the next day or the next couple of days, Georgia gets a commit at that same position from someone who feels a little bit under the radar. You should be very excited because the evaluations at Georgia are so good. I mean, this is how you end up with 3-star Jordan Davis, how you end up with 2-star, I'll give him maybe being a little generous, Lab McConkey, how you end up with a lot of these kids that you're like, oh, I didn't know Georgia was in on this guy, or I didn't know, I hadn't heard this name before. Tyler Williams, you've heard the name before because Georgia had a wide receiver named Tyler Williams, which is going to be confusing to some folks. It's not that same Tyler Williams. He's in Minnesota now. But Tyler Williams, when you see a commit happen, you should definitely get excited because that means that Georgia clearly has their board, clearly has their evals, clearly has all those things lined up. And so I think Tyler Williams is one of those guys that really fits into that mold. Somebody who may not have been your first choice, but I think is somebody that they absolutely think can play in Athens.
I'm going to leave him on my board. I've still got CJ Wiley there. I've still got Travis Smith Jr. Another name to be thinking about is maybe that Landon Rolden kid from North Oconee. I've done a breakdown on him as well. But I'm not going to take CJ Wiley off my board because I agree with you. I'm about 100% sure that it may not be that he comes to Georgia, but I don't think he ends up Florida State. There's no doubt about that.
I don't think so either. All right. That's the recruiting update, man. Get ready. I'll just say this. I ended a show with it a couple weeks ago, and not a lot of folks maybe didn't pay attention. Georgia's not done, man. That what's about to come is gonna be. Georgia is just getting started, and if you like recruiting, then definitely subscribe to the show, tune in, but more importantly, get locked into some of these kids because I do think that Georgia is certainly going to continue to stack bodies. All right, speaking of stacking bodies, Bud Elliot put out his blue chip ratio. Bud Elliot, he's a college football recruiting analyst and for 24/7 Sports. Does really good work. I like what Bud does. Don't always agree with him, but I do like the work that he does. he puts out a blue chip ratio every year, and this is what the blue chip ratio is. Blue chip ratio is essentially a percentage of 4 and 5 stars that a team has signed over the last 4 classes, right? So he's looking at essentially over the last 4 classes, what percentage of those recruits were 4 and 5 star recruits, and so what he does is he's basically determined that in order to win a national championship, going back and looking back at the previous, going all the way back, I think to 2013 is how far he goes back of who won national championships. What was their blue chip ratio? He's determined that you have to have at least a 50% blue chip ratio if you're going to win a national championship. So these are the teams that he has said have potential to win a national championship this year based off of their blue chip ratio. And so what I wanted to do is look at, first of all, Georgia's third on the list. Georgia has an 80% blue chip ratio. Should not be a surprise to anyone. It's one of the highest in many years across all teams. But Georgia's 80% blue chip ratio. Alabama 88%. Ohio State 90%. You look at some teams on here, I think, that are interesting, like Auburn, for example. I think Auburn being at 53% might surprise some folks. USC being at 59% may surprise some folks because I think that 59% is all on the offensive side of the ball. But Coach, tell me your thoughts on, just in terms of like roster player versus coaching. We know what Kirby Smart has said, that if you don't recruit, you're not going to win. That players will win over coaching any day. How do you think about this list, and how do you reconcile, kind of blue chips and those elite recruits versus the coaching and development?
I think it's really going to be your foundation. It definitely is not going to hurt that you're bringing kids into the program that are very solid players out of high school. Ohio State is always going to monopolize the Big Ten. That's why the numbers are always going to be there. They're just going to take part of that groupings. They're just going to go there because, obviously we can't have so many 5 stars at one place because of the competition. They'll eat each other, as far as weed each other out in that process. I see Alabama and Georgia's numbers, honestly. I see Alabama going to trend down. Georgia will be trending up as they continue. If they were to continue to be consistent with this information and this percentile, but it has to. I think there's a perception out there that a lot of people think that 5 stars just show up and you let them play. You have to coach their ass. And I am so big on that. To me, honestly, it was harder to coach kids who were talented versus a kid who was less talented, because that less talented kid knew that he was going to have to give everything he had just to be level par for that day. But that kid that was really talented could take time off. He would, and that's where some coaches that's the difference for me being an elite coach versus being a good coach is you're willing to, I had to a lot of times with my running backs or a linebacker or whatever I was coaching. If I had a kid that was the stuff, he was the best player on the team, he knew he was, I would have to fire him at least once a day. I would fire him. I'd kick his butt, send him to the sideline, make him feel sorry for himself, put the next guy in and say, you know what? You are always replaceable. There's a good side to the bad side of that, where you have to play sort of the good cop, bad cop at times. I really do think, though, that the development that these guys get being elite already athletically is that they bring the maturity, they bring the development, they grow them as a young man, they teach them how to deal when things are hard, because now they're not the man among boys anymore. They are men among men, and they have to figure out a way to become the elite of that group, the alpha out of that group. And that's where the coaches, to me, the really good coaches, pull those kids through and actually maximize a 5 stars talent. Because if you try to just let them play on their 5-star talent alone, you will always underachieve with that. So I think that's to answer your question, it has to be the player development along with being able to, it's not necessarily, we've seen plenty of 5 stars that didn't pan out. And so it's also the level of trying to see, okay, this is a 5-star kid who's a high character kid, who's a kid that I think when it gets tough, he's going to get tougher. You've got to look at those things. What is his mental capacities at? Is he got a lot of mental toughness? Does he seem to do well when things are hard versus when things are going great? Is he a leader among that group? And like I said, being able to pull and extrapolate that alpha from that group, that's so important when it comes to having these blue chip kids. And that's the reason why we're seeing Georgia on the trend up. And honestly, I think at number 2, Alabama, we're going to see that 88% start to drop as the years go on. I don't see that maintaining that. Ohio State will just have what they have due to the fact that they're in the Big Ten. And obviously, I think they monopolize that other group of 5 stars that don't go to the Southeastern Conference.
Yeah, and I think I think you hit on a number of points there that I just want to touch on and highlight. The main one that I was going to talk about too is there's not all 4 and 5 stars are created equal, and so there's a difference between a recruiting service, labeling a kid a 4 or 5 star, right,
Mm-hmm.
and a coaching staff have that kid at whatever level on their evals and their boards. And so I think that's been the biggest difference when you look at a list like this. And when you consider, according to Bud Elliot, these are 16 teams that have the magic ratio, that have an opportunity to potentially compete for a national championship, right? Based off of their roster makeup. Florida ain't competing for no national championship. Guarantee you that. Because there is a difference between a recruiting service like 24/7 or On3 or any of the other ones, and the evaluation. And Eric, I wanted to highlight this. He said, Kirby Smart's blue chip recruiting, along with his 3-star evaluation, is why he's got a leg up on most everyone else. I agree, because the evals are really what makes it. So you can say, and Kirby has said this publicly too. He doesn't pay attention to like recruiting services and what they rank these kids. Now, I don't know how much I believe that or not, because I do think that they tap into a lot of these kids. They have to. A lot of these kids, the evals, how they find out about the kids through these recruiting camps and things like that. But that set aside, they still run all of these kids through their evaluations, through their boards, through their size, speed, skill criteria. And that's why you see a lot of kids that are 3 stars that end up, Jordan Davis, best example, Lab McConkey, another one, that end up being elite players for Georgia, that wouldn't even be part of this percent, this 80% that's on this list. Jordan Davis wouldn't be in this 80%. Lab McConkey wouldn't be in this 80%.
Go back even to like Eric Stokes, that'd be another one.
Yeah. Exactly. A lot of players that would not fit into this percentage. So that's number 1, the evals. Number 2, you mentioned culture, which I think is incredibly important. Kirby Smart has said he's made a decision. He made this decision after Georgia lost the Sugar Bowl to Texas in 2019. Kirby Smart made a decision that he was going to prioritize culture. And he was in culture over everything else. And so that means that through their evaluation, they're looking for kids who, do you want to work? Is your priority to get developed? Is your priority to get coached? Is your priority to be part of the team, to be part of something bigger than yourself? And that's different than a lot of 5-star players that end up at other places. And so that's the thing when I look at this, not all 5 stars are created equal. That's why I think Georgia continues to be where they are. And, and Eddie mentioned it in the chat too, as well, where he said that, the difference has been Nick Saban when it comes to, Georgia and Alabama have had similar roster makeups. And I couldn't agree more. I think it comes down to coaching. Excuse me. I told y'all this is my flu game. Comes down to coaching ultimately. And I think Kirby Smart is really starting to hit his stride there. I think hopefully he learned a lot from the 2023 SEC championship game that he can carry over into this year as well.
It parallels too that Ryan Day, to me, and I agree with Randy in the chat, to me, he's under the most pressure. He's got the most talent, and he needs to be winning a title with that talent. I think he's the one that you put into the hot box, the hot seat, and he's got to to produce this year with that kind of talent that he's got up there at Ohio State. So that's the thing that makes it so nice to see from our perspective. That 80% is relevant to me, but that gap of 20% that makes the 100% is what Kirby does to me. That makes him the elite of the elite. Is he takes that 20% of kids that are 3 stars and 4 stars, and he's developing a whole group. It's holistic to where he is maximizing his talent on the field and putting the best players on the field to win ball games. And I think that's the difference why you don't see these other teams, even with high blue chip percentage, not being successful.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it with the best example recently is Texas A&M, right? Jimbo, number 1 class, went out and bought a number 1 team, and then literally did nothing with it. And I think that's a good example of the difference between culture, development, all those things, and maybe stargazing a little bit. So
exactly.
All right, I thought that was interesting. Blue chip ratio. Let's talk about something else, Coach.
All right.
Before we move on, we're going to talk a little bit about this EA Sports toughest places to play.
Yeah.
And listen, I don't know why they put this out there. Maybe it's just for publicity. Tell me your thoughts about this list.
It really just makes me, and I'm not going to steal your thunder of what we talked about pre-show, but I know we got a lot of disheartened Auburn fans out there because of what Jordan Hare does for those people. But it seems to me, if you look at what we've done in the last 7 to 8 years, the Jake Fromm's year, the year we went on to play for the national championship, in Kirby's second year, we got the break speed off of us there. But since then, Auburn's been sort of like a second home to us. But I kind of agree where we're at 5th, but I really don't see how you don't look at, Alabama where they're at, those kinds of deals. But, I've been to Doak Campbell Stadium too at Florida State. It's rocking. But, to me, it has to have some relevance to how that team's playing that year. LSU, to me, was always Death Valley at night. Oh, my God. I mean, if you look at the atmosphere that place has, but LSU, other than, the 2019 team, other than that, it seems like it could be give or take whether or not they're going to have a good ball game there or not. And it's the same thing that goes with like Alabama as well. So I'm really fine with that, honestly, because if they're looking at just, win percentage at home and things of that nature, there's a lot 4 or 5 different stat lines they look at to produce these numbers. I'm fine with that. I'm not gonna be too disgusted with it, honestly.
Yeah, let's back up and just real quick. So EA Sports, the College Football 25 is coming out. This is they put out their toughest places to play. And this was what they said. They said the development team worked to compile a list of the top 25 toughest places to play, factoring in historical stats such as home winning percentage, home game attendance, active home win streaks, team prestige, and more. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that's the science behind the list that they put out. But when I look at the list and I see Kyle Field at Texas A&M number 1, Bryant-Denny Stadium, Alabama number 2, LSU, Tiger Stadium number 3, Ohio State number 4, Sanford Stadium number 5, I don't understand how that science plays into if you just look at the top 5, right? It is like, okay, well, if you're looking at home winning percentage, I'm not sure Kyle Field is what year are we talking about?
Yeah, no, right.
If you're looking at, the team, I'll say this. I think Bryant-Denny Stadium is a tough place to play because the University of Alabama is the team that you're playing. I don't think Bryant-Denny Stadium is anything special in terms of environment, in terms of atmosphere. Right. It's just not. Like, I've been to games at Bryant-Denny Stadium. I have not seen Bryant-Denny Stadium affect a game, right? When Alabama, the best example, have to go a ways back, but 2010 versus Cam Newton, Alabama was leading 24-0. And Cam Newton single-handedly came back in Bryant-Denny Stadium and won that football game.
Yep.
Because the crowd at Bryant-Denny Stadium can't affect the game. Now, you flip it, you go to Jordan Hare Stadium, Auburn can be running out a bunch of 2 stars with pink underwear, and all of a sudden our Alabama rolls in, and it's like all of a sudden they're the freaking
World
Kansas City
beaters,
Chiefs or somebody. Yeah, because that's an environment that can affect a game. And so either you have to go that direction, or you have to assume, assuming all the teams are good, which is which field is the toughest place to play. I don't know why they put out this list, because I think it's just a publicity
yeah, it is.
maybe because it's just my list. I'll give you my list. Excuse me. Number 1, LSU. By far, LSU at night is maybe the toughest place to play. In sports, I would say it that way. I mean, LSU at night is tough. LSU in the daytime, in the middle of the day, 3:30 kickoff is tough. Now LSU in the morning, not so much, but LSU, number 1. I would certainly put. Excuse me, I'm all over the place right now. I would certainly put. I'll just, instead of giving you my top 5, I'll just give you a few. I'd certainly put. I think Jordan-Hare Stadium is up there, especially at night. I think Sanford Stadium is up there. I think Neyland Stadium is up there. It's not up there when Georgia comes to town, but I do think Neyland Stadium is up there because I think they can affect the game. You saw that with Alabama a couple of years ago. I think a lot of these stadiums, I don't know, it's just a little bit all over the place. Coach, who do you think, if you had to list a couple, who do you think are some of the toughest places to play?
If I renumbered them, I would definitely keep, honestly, I like where we're at number 5, but I would go this way. I would put LSU number 1. I would put Jordan-Hare at number 2. I think Penn State needs to be in the top 5. We've seen plenty of games that have been played there. Their atmosphere is electric at night as well. I think that's something that definitely helps them, except when they play a certain team. It's just like Auburn. For some odd reason, when you get into Jordan-Hare and they're playing Alabama, they're world beaters. Doak Campbell is relevant if Florida State was relevant. And right now, Florida State's trying to get back on the map. I know we've been making fun of them for the past year, it seems. But, if that team is doing as well as they can potentially be, I've been in a game at Doak Campbell. I think that's definitely one that could fit that criteria as well. I think, actually Alabama could be out of the top 5 and leave Ohio State where it's at the
I would say the Swamp, right? So Georgia fans, most of us may not have been to a game in the Swamp because Georgia doesn't play there. But if you've ever been to a game in the Swamp, I mean, that when Florida is good, that place, it is hell to play in the Swamp when Florida is good.
And you think about that, so the relevancy though, when we play Tennessee, Auburn, and we don't play Florida at at Ben Hill, so it's relevancy, right? Because we have whooped the crap out of Auburn, we've whooped the crap out of Tennessee, so for us as Georgia fans, it's hard for us to even put that. But I do know it's just like with LSU. Their relevancy has to do with how they're winning. It's just like you used Alabama as the exemplar a while ago. The only reason why it seems to be the top is because who you're playing.
Yeah, and so many things that go into it. Maybe we'll come up with our own criteria and do our own list.
There you go.
Harry says the student Harry said the student section at Sanford feels much closer to the field than Bryant-Denny. It is, and the student section at Sanford is also, the way that they've got it designed is you have it's almost like you don't have multiple student sections, but it almost is like you do, because you have the student section in the corner. There in the corner of the end zone where the band is, and then you have that west end zone where they put all the recruits and all their families and all that stuff, and you got kind of it feels like another kind of student section on that end as well too. Listen, I think my general thoughts, and the reason I want to talk about it is I just think a lot of these stadiums are definitely underrated. I think you have to separate the criteria. For me, I think Georgia fits into the criteria with Alabama, to be honest. I think Sanford Stadium, we saw it versus Tennessee. I was at that game in 2022. We've seen it versus Arkansas in 2021. We've seen it a number of different times. LSU in 2013. Sanford Stadium can be hell to play in if your team is good coming into Sanford Stadium. But it's mostly hell to play in because you got to play Kirby Smart in Georgia. And I think Alabama is the same way. It's mostly we'll see how Kalen DeBoer does, but it was mostly hell to play in because you had to play Alabama and Nick Saban.
Right.
LSU, Auburn, some of these stadiums, they are just hell to play in. No matter, like, it doesn't matter who's coaching, who's on the other side, they are hell to play in because that actual stadium is just, I don't know, maybe on an Indian burial ground or something. It's
I know,
wild
right?
for some of these places. Yeah. All right, Coach. Let's move on. I did want to touch on real quick that Wes Johnson, our guy Wes Johnson, Georgia baseball coach, has received a well-deserved extension. So the baseball coaching carousel has been started spinning with the Texas A&M coach Slosh. I'll just call him Slosh because I can't say the rest of his name. Flipped, to Texas, to their rival. And so that opened up a huge opening in college baseball. Georgia and Josh Brooks did a great job of locking down Wes Johnson through 2030. Really excited about that. I think it's well deserved. I think Wes Johnson has proven not just that he can put a winning team together and put a winning team together quickly, but the culture that he's building, what he cares about, how he supports the brand, all those things. I think, and also shout out to Josh Brooks. I think Josh Brooks has been doing a fantastic job. It took him a little bit to get his feet underneath him as athletic director, but the last couple of years, the last couple of hires, the way he's handled Kirby Smart's contract extension, the way he handled the Mike White, hire and giving him more resources and more NIL money for basketball. You see what that's happening with recruiting. Went out and hired Wes Johnson, just a number of good decisions by Josh Brooks that I think are going to put Georgia in a great spot going forward.
It's really cool to see too, because when you see that he took the senior group of kids and even the underclassmen who are probably going to go pro, with the amount of underclassmen that came in, he developed a culture. You could see those kids, how they loved on one another throughout that year. They grew and got stronger as the year went, and were one win away from making it to Omaha. Honestly, the bats were hot. We're going to bring in some pitching. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's already brought in like 20 transfers, and roughly, I think there was 4 or 5 of them are in the top 100. So he is already getting next year's roster prepped and ready to go. And I know he's looking in. He's heard all of the people, and he's not dumb. He knows that we need some solidarity in our pitching game. I think obviously bringing these guys back with Trey Phelps and that group to just continue the massacre of hitting that long ball, it's just going to pay dividends. And honestly, Josh Brooks having the foresight to see what Wes Johnson has done in this year and what he brings to the team and to the culture of this program, we've got some good things to look forward to in the spring with Georgia baseball.
Yeah, and let me tell you, Georgia went out and got Mike White from Florida, and I know, for Florida fans, I think because of where Florida was with Billy Donovan. So Billy Donovan, one of the best college basketball coaches in history, won 2 national championships at Florida. I think they had those expectations that Mike White maybe, wasn't quite living up to. But could you imagine? I'm trying to imagine any world where, so we know that happened. Mike White came from Florida to Georgia, so that rival move. But I'm trying to find any world where a Georgia coach goes and plays for a national title, right? In any sport, so say baseball, basketball, whatever. And then the next day goes and coaches at Florida, or goes and takes a job at Tennessee. Can you imagine? I'm trying to imagine that happening. I mean, I can't even imagine what Texas A&M fans are feeling like, because that hatred between Texas and Texas A&M, it runs so deep. And for their baseball coach to take their team to the national title game, one game from winning a College World Series, and then the next day he goes to Texas and takes the whole staff with him, and then half their team enters the portal. I mean, that's a wild move.
I'm gonna tell you too. Honestly, I as a coach, sometimes I know mentally it wears on you because of what you just gone through, all the different things you have to kind of experience and decompress with, and a lot of times some questions will just irritate you. We've seen it plenty of times with Coach Smart in the pressers, but I really think that was an ass move of what he did, because a guy, basically one of the beat guys, just called him out and said, "Hey, you look to take the Texas job next year," and he gave that kid immortal hell about, how about just talking about right now what I'm doing here? And then within 24 hours defected and said, "Hey, see you later. I am going to Texas." And, and made that guy look like an ass on, as he's making a relevant question for him to answer. Not necessarily does he have to answer it? No, but don't be an ass when you really know that you're about to go do that. And I think that was just wrong on any measure.
Yeah. And there was reporting that came out that said this deal may have been done may have been, in the works a few weeks ago. But yeah, total ass move to basically sit there and say, and told the reporter, said it's a selfish, I think that's a selfish question.
I know.
Talk about selfish. Selfish is the next morning going to the team's bitter rival, taking your coaching staff with you. I mean, just wild. And also, I mean, you get paid, a lot of money to get those questions asked of you. And in that moment, there are 100 different ways you could answer that question instead of saying, I think that's a selfish question. I mean, you could, a number of different ways you can dodge that question without
dodge it, deter it, so deflect it, whatever, but don't be an ass.
Yeah. So that being said, sorry, Texas A&M. Georgia has our coach locked up. I'm glad that it happened because it gave Wes Johnson an extension, forced Josh Brooks to make what is a good decision, I think, anyway, and to lock Wes Johnson down, and we'll see what happens there. Locked him down. All right, Coach. We're gonna end the show on a note about hot seat and pressure to win. This comes from, I saw this video with Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel. They were at some events this week, and they were asked about Ohio State. So we saw the blue chip ratio of Ohio State at 90%. They were asked about Ohio State's roster, right? And this is what they said. So Urban Meyer, national championship winning coach at multiple schools, former coach at Ohio State, obviously. He said, this is one of the most talented rosters in the last decade, maybe ever. And he did say, he said, I know they still have to play, but he said, this could be maybe the best roster, the most talented roster ever. And I took that to mean maybe it's Ohio, maybe you meant Ohio State, maybe you meant college football as a whole. Either way, enormous statement. Jim Tressel said, former Ohio State coach who won a national championship, said, I don't know if I've ever seen that many great players in that building all at once. Two former Ohio State coaches coming out and saying, Ohio State has maybe the most talented team ever at Ohio State right now. I have one question for you, Coach. Why does Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel hate Ryan Day enough to put that pressure on that guy and come out and say those statements?
It really is. I think they're trying, in a sense, to indirectly kind of troll him a little bit on that, because I think they're pissed off too about what he is not meeting the expectations. I'm sure both of them would love to see, with them both having a national championship under their belt at Ohio State, that not seeing him being able to achieve with the talent he's got. I think about, what if Mark Richt and Jim Donnan were asked those same questions, because in sequential order, you look, that's basically what they just did to Ohio State's two coaches prior to Ryan Day taking the job. But, anybody's going to be able to say that team is loaded. I agree that team is loaded, with maybe a small question mark at quarterback, whatever comes of that. But, they have indirectly put a ton of pressure on him. He, from a ceiling standpoint, has to hit the mark. If he doesn't, I truly feel like he is definitely one that will be on the hot seat if he can't achieve that national championship status this year with the talent he has.
Yeah, I agree. They've definitely put the pressure on Ryan Day. He already had pressure, but man, good Lord, especially if you, God help you if you lose to Michigan again. But if it feels very much like national championship or bust for Ohio State. Tell me just real quick as we kind of wrap up. Who's on your list of the coaches who are under the most pressure to win big this year? Now, when I say under the most pressure, it doesn't necessarily mean this is not a hot seat list. It doesn't necessarily. It could mean that the coach is going to get fired if they don't win. But I just mean like who is under the most pressure, all things considered, to win big this year in college football.
Well, you and I have prepped on this many times before, but from previous preps that you and I have talked about in previous sessions, I would say ceiling is definitely Ryan Day. Ryan Day needs to get to that national, and I think I've already hit on that. Billy Napier, God almighty, with all the things he's got going off the field issues, man, he's got to crawl out of the cellar. He's got to get bowl eligible this year. I think if you don't see him at bowl eligibility this year, I don't know. There may be too much damage done to the ship. It may still go down, but he has got to get bowl eligible this year. So I'm going to take those two guys. I'm going to say Ryan Day at the ceiling has to get to that national championship, preferably win it, and Billy Napier get out of the cellar and just get being bowl eligible this year with Florida, which I don't see happening.
Yeah. No, I don't see that happening either. I like that. Yeah, I think Billy Napier, Ryan Day are two good ones. I'm going to add Kalen DeBoer. I think the pressure of following Nick Saban, I understand is his first year. I understand, he's under contract. Alabama's clearly not gonna fire him if he doesn't win big. But I think the pressure of first job in the SEC, first job in where there's a true microscope and spotlight on everything that you do. I think Kalen DeBoer is under enormous pressure, more than anybody wants to admit. I think Brent Venables at Oklahoma is also under pressure. You see what Texas is doing. You see what Sarkisian is doing. Now you're moving into the SEC, and coming off of an underwhelming year. Fortunately for Oklahoma, they beat Texas. So I think that was a saving grace for them with how they played some of the year last year. So again, not saying those two guys will get fired if they don't win big, but I think they're under enormous pressure. I think if you're talking about guys who are going to get fired if they don't get bowl eligible or find a way to win some games they shouldn't win, I think Billy Napier. I think Sam Pittman is probably already out at Arkansas. Unfortunately, I hate that for him. And I think those are probably two that are probably the hottest right now.
Without a doubt. I didn't think about DeBoer because I'm always in that mentality. If I'm a new coach, typically a 3-year window is what you like to see. But unfortunately, that window is accelerated when you're the head coach of the University of Alabama. Nick Saban has spoiled its fan base. And unfortunately, I think they're going to be under a little bit. We're going to see some wailing and gnashing of teeth as this year goes. So it's really easy to use that as sort of the scapegoat. Well, it's his first year if they don't exceed these expectations that everybody seems to think they're going to have. So that's a good pick. I didn't think about DeBoer.
Yeah, DeBoer, listen, that pressure, I'll just say this to Alabama fans. I agree with you, Coach. There's no 2-3 year window in college football anymore to actually build a program, to install what you need to install. Definitely not at Alabama, really nowhere, but especially not at Alabama. But let me tell you something. So the 2007 Georgia-Alabama game where Matthew Stafford threw a touchdown in overtime to win the game, right? In that game, Mikey Henderson. If you go back and look, you will see Georgia. They dog pile in the corner of the end zone. If you go back, you can find it on YouTube or somewhere. You will see a dog pile, and you'll see Alabama fans throwing beer, bottle, all kinds of stuff at Georgia players. If you think Tennessee throwing mustard was bad, you wait and see if Kirby Smart goes in and runs Alabama out of their own building. I'm not saying Alabama fans are going to throw trash, but if you think that Tennessee fans were upset by that Ole Miss game when they threw the golf ball at Lane Kiffin, just wait till you see how Alabama fans are talking about Kalen DeBoer if Kirby Smart goes in and runs them out of that building. Just wait. So you're talking about a 3-year window. I don't think this guy has a 3-game window. I mean, I think they got to go play at Wisconsin. Then they turn around and host Georgia, and man, DeBoer. I think DeBoer is a good coach. I think DeBoer will get. I mean, I think he's going to get good players because I do think Alabama. Henry said it. Henry said that DeBoer is a good coach and that he's doing well in recruiting it, which I agree with in the chat. But I will say that so much of that is momentum off of Nick Saban, off of the Bama brand, off of where Alabama has been, et cetera. You just wait. You wait. If Alabama loses by, they lose by a field goal, they lose by a touchdown to Georgia or Texas or somebody like that, they're going to be fine. If one of these teams comes in to Bryant-Denny Stadium and wins by 3
Throttles
scores,
them.
Boy, you just wait.
I agree with what Eric said too, and I was just about to say that as well. This is not really Kalen DeBoer's class. Let him go through a full year with what he's got, and let him see what he does next year. That would truly make me feel and understand where he's at. And there's a lot of open space there to talk about. It's open range between now and then. So who knows?
Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, thanks for hanging in there with us. Thanks for the chat tonight. Really enjoyed the liveliness, and thanks for putting up with my my coughing and whatever else you were getting through your headphones. Really appreciate it. Subscribe to the show. Go follow Coach Hayes at Coach Hayes Huddle at Coach Hayes HUDL. Coach is putting out a lot of good breakdowns this summer. He is doing work, so go give him a subscribe. And we'll be back on Friday. We're going to break down all kinds of stuff. Not just, we'll probably have, I'll just tell you right now, we're probably going to have a commit or two more to talk about. But we'll also start talking about, a little bit of a schedule preview. I mean, it's getting that time where we start looking at the schedule in depth, where we start looking at teams and matchups and who we think is going to be where. We're going to be breaking down all of that for you and more. So thanks so much for subscribing to the show, and we will see y'all next time.